Good morning. My name is Ron Swaney. I'm the Fire Management Officer for the Confederated CSKT Tribes. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Intertribal Timber Council for recognizing two of our CSKT employees, Mr. Darryl Claremont and Mr. Bob McCrae. Both were recipients of the Earl R. Wilcox Memorial Award for Excellence in Fire Management. Darryl is our fuels officer, and he was a recipient in 2020. And Bob McCrae is our operations specialist, and he was a recipient in 2021. The tribes manage the fire program through a 638 contract. That in conjunction with the delegated authorities of the Flathead Agency Superintendent. And although a tribal program, we still abide by all the federal rules and policies. We follow the Red Book, 310-1, and other guiding documents. In 2000, our tribe adopted a very comprehensive forest management plan. The plan was developed by specialists from fisheries, water quality, wildlife, forestry, fire, and also we invited our culture committees participated, both Salish Pondere and our Kootenai Culture Committee. And what we've done is taken traditional knowledge and ecological knowledge and combine that with Western science to build a very comprehensive management plan that looks to mimic the natural disturbance of wildfire with our management activities. For fire management, there were some objectives identified. One was to reduce the risk of wildfire to the urban interface. The other one was to restore the non-lethal fire regime. And the plan also identified as an objective is to reintroduce fire into our cultural landscape. At the same time, we adopted that plan. There was a rewrite of the National Fire Plan. And this rewrite took the BIA tribal programs in a whole different direction, where we were reactive to fires and taking suppression action to protect trust. Now we're more proactive in protecting trust assets. And we do this through the prevention and education program and our fuels program. Prevention and education, what we try to do is provide the residents an understanding of what it is to have defensible space, for them to understand that fire is a part of this environment, always has and always will be. And we try to build community wildland protection plans, get people engaged in understanding their role, duties, and responsibilities, protecting their residents that they live in the wildland urban interface, and really try to provide that proactive educational perspective. The tribes also produced a DVD that is a creation story from the Salish people, and it's a coyote story. It's Beaver Steals Fire. It's an excellent publication that we put together. It's on a DVD as a book that you can follow along. We've given this to schools, made it available to other folks, other disciplines, and there's interviews of elders in there that talks about the historic role of fire with our people and how our people evolved with fire. So it's really an interesting educational approach, which is a result of a change in National Fire Plan policy and direction. So I mentioned the fuels program. The division of our CSKT tribes really went out to build a very aggressive and comprehensive fuels program with support of our forest plan that was just approved and the National Fire Plan. To date, we've treated 140,000 acres of fuels treatments on our reservation. 31,000 of that has been the reintroduction of fire. We've seen some real benefits from our fuels treatments. In this situation here, this is the Garden Creek Fire of 2018. This red line is the perimeter, and the thick red line is where the fire intersected with our treatments. And this is the image. This is, this tells the story. It's night and day. Areas that were untreated, that were in that fire perimeter, burnt like this. And just so you know, we could not hold this and did not hold this road, as opposed to the fire behavior that we had inside the areas that we had treated. You see it's low intensity, surface fire, flame lengths from 6 inches to a foot. And we were able to get real close and aggressive with dozer lines and catch this fire quickly. We've also seen a real dramatic difference in fire behavior and resulting fire effects in our treated areas. This is from the 2007 Chippy Creek fire. Guess which side of this fence got burnt, got treated, right? So in the treated area, you can see we had very little mortality, very low scorch heights, and the fire was basically an underburn, as opposed to the untreated area where there was group torching and erratic fire behavior, and it was a stand replacement event. So a couple things that we liked is our treatments are effective and they provide safety to our firefighters and protect our resources. We've also brought our elders out to our project sites just to let them know that their wants, their wishes, their voice is heard, and give them an opportunity to help us design our treatments to meet their objectives, what they want on their land. And it's been a great relationship. Here we got Pat Pierre, and our crew is out at a project site in Cottonwood, and it was a really nice day listening to Pat and his input on what he would like to see. We've introduced fire into our lands and had positive results from our first foods. And this situation here is Jocko Prairie. You can see the resprout of the camas. And I'll just let you know, before we burnt this, there was just a couple remnant plants. After we burned it, Art Trahan took his mom and some elders from the Salish Culture Committee up to here just to let them see just how this area responded to fire, that our first foods, they depended on this. Fire was a part of that cycle, and fire brought this area to life. So what we've seen is a lot of cross-boundary fires, large fires, ever since 2000. And with the RTRL authority that is now present in the fuels program, this has provided us an opportunity to leverage with our interagency partners to do treatments to protect our resources and to enhance our Aboriginal grounds. We've got projects with the Nature Conservancy, Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Lolo National Forest, both Plains District and Missoula District. And a myriad of objectives, tribal objectives to enhance culturally significant areas, to provide protection to our boundaries, to improve wildlife habitat in areas that we border. We're trying to mitigate weeds. We're just doing a bunch of very interesting work using this RTRL authority, and it's been another opportunity for our tribe to grow and to learn, to prosper. This is a slide just to show how much the fuels TRM, or workforce development funding, and the aviation funding is providing opportunity for our programs to go to other places and do fuels work and still meet the intent of that funding, is our funding to protect trust. We've gone to Fort Yuma, over to Colville. We've done some work in Umatilla, and this picture here is from Eastern Oklahoma region and Forest Black Bears region. This is Josh Williams. He is his fuel specialist. Josh invited us over to do some burning this year and some fuels work. This is John Cub Molitor. Cubby taught some Oklahoma folks S212, provided a lot of education on how to safely and properly operate a chainsaw. This is Ron Swaney on a leaf blower. You know, I couldn't believe it, but that's a tool that we can utilize, and we've bought some now. We've got some out in our cache. And this is an area, this is Grand Round. They were there as well. I mean, this opportunity goes to all tribes, and we did a pile burn. Just to let you know, we thinned this area probably 3 days before the pile burn. And so we're learning different ways to do treatments, different ideas on treatment design, and a really good educational opportunity. I'm hoping that part of that workforce development includes this type of movement of our people to different places to build that relationship, to understand different ways to go about treatments, and to learn and to share. This is a COVID-19 slide. I just had to throw it in. This is our Type 2A crew doing the morning check to make sure everyone, the screen to make sure everyone doesn't have a fever. And COVID is impacted 2020 and is going to impact 2021. Already has in our training profile. It's just been online learning, and it's just something we're going to have to deal with. And the mitigations, logistical support needs. I mean, everything's just going to be the same. What I'm seeing now is we need more facility space just to house our folks, to provide that separation and to be compliant with COVID-19, social distancing guidelines. This is a slide that just shows the last time we did a planning effort through the BIA to identify our funding. And this is from 1998. This is our most efficient level. And here's our organization. And at that time we had 4 people in fuels. Now we have 40. And you can see this doesn't even reflect what's going on today. And I just want, I love what's going on with fuels. I love what's going on with aviation. I love the proactive approach to fire management. I think just being able to work together collectively to figure out how to properly fund administrative needs and our, support needs for the program that has evolved and looks to continue to evolve. This is just to show our fire history. Things have changed, and I'm sure this is consistent across the board. This is 1978 to 1997. We had 3 years with large fires. From 1998 to 2017, we've had 3 years without large fires. And it's just a real change in the amount of fires that we're getting and the size of the fires and the acres burned. And this is one last plug. As we talked about successional planning and looking to promote from within and get your next replacement. So the fuels funding looks really solid. Aviation looks good. I'm just hoping there'll be some funding that comes down for the preparedness side in terms of operations and our administration. This is my TRM class, and I'll just go quickly around. This is Jason Furchew. He was a FMO over in South Dakota. Dale Glenmore, he's the Navajo FMO. This guy's Ted Mason. Ted was air tech over Liberty Fire, and he's in the Bureau of Land Management. At this point, he was a smoke jumper. This is John Thompson. John is an IC for a Type 2 incident management team here in the Northern Rockies. He's also the West BLM, west side of Montana BLM FMO. This man is Colt Mortensen. He's the Lolo FMO currently. At this time, he was a helicopter manager in Colorado. This is Brian Schultz. Brian was on the Hot Shot crew and was on Storm King Mountain when South Canyon Storm King Mountain, 1994. Great opportunity here. It takes a lot of time to get people trained up to be division boss, you're talking about 16, 17 years of dedicated service. And then the education piece to be 401, to meet the 401 requirements. I just think within Indian country, there's a need for a TRM type of program. And I'm just hoping that we can incorporate some of our tribal colleges to make that happen. I think we could provide specific training to people, how they'll operate within the BIA tribal system, and provide them, you know, with WIPDIS and IQCS, and, you know, medical standards and in-briefing packages, budgeting help, just a number of things that would be very helpful and provide, you know, that link to the next leadership.
My name is Bodie Shaw. I'm the acting chief fire director for BIA NIFC out of Boise, Idaho. My normal day job had been the Northwest Region Deputy Regional Director for Trust Services. And Darryl Account had asked me back in December when Leon Ben had announced that he was going to be moving to Fort Apache Agency as superintendent, if I would step in and be happy to. So this is closing in on my third month of my 4-month assignment, and really happy to present in front of you today. And it looks like we'll have an opportunity for questions in the chat. So yeah, just briefly wanted to introduce myself. And as many know, I left NIFC about 10 years ago when I was the deputy for then Fire Director Lyle Carlisle. So 10 years, we still have many of our same challenges, which I'll, excuse me, talk a little bit about, but also some new opportunities on the horizon for all of us. So without further ado, let me get into my presentation. So as we all know and are very happy to have Secretary Deb Haaland join us, Department of Interior Secretary. One of this quote, I think, is very apropos to hear from her, especially in the context of Wildland Fire. I had the opportunity to brief Secretary Haaland last Thursday for the fire director's operational brief, along with Secretary Vilsack. It was great to highlight some of the good things that we were doing in Indian country, BIA and tribes. Focusing on workforce transformation, RTRL, and how we are looking at shaping the future in terms of our culture of fire management, as well as moving forward with communities and hiring for the long term, more of a long-term vision and focus. So I mentioned the high-level meeting that we had with both secretaries. Just yesterday, we had the chance to meet with Secretary Haaland for an hour and just have a roundtable discussion about fire. We had representatives from all 4 fire bureaus, as well as tribes in this forum. Excuse me. And it went off very well. I think it really gave Secretary Haaland a great opportunity to have a better feeling and understanding, not only from our high-level presentation of the week previous, but also just hearing from folks on the ground who she had a chance to ask questions to. And we also had a chance to ask her questions. So it's great to see the high-profile setting that Wildland Fire is getting with this new secretary, as she's starting to wrap her arms around some of the challenges that we face. And then lastly, another presentation I wanted to share, Office of Tribal Relations, U.S. Department of Agriculture, has asked, and we've put together a presentation, kind of a soup to nuts, how our programs are funded through the appropriations process, how those appropriations trickle down, fire policy, operations, preparedness, prevention. So it's really a great, once again, another great opportunity to highlight the good work that we're doing, and really cause some of our managers, as we put this presentation together, to go back to the grassroots level why are we doing this? What's our mission, task, and purpose? So very important, especially when we're sharing that with different audiences. Another thing I wanted to do was share our 2020 stats and figures. As you can see up on the screen, very active year. Look at a number of fires, the 10-year average, the acres burned, nearly triple what our 10-year average is. Real quickly looking at our permanent temp and AD firefighters, 7 hotshot crews, 8 helicopters, 8 seats, 2 water scoopers, 3 air attack platforms, Model 52 program centers with over 230 engines, and then our prevention programs, which I know Sam has also supplied a PowerPoint for. Also wanted to share some of the support that we garnered to assist us in last year's very difficult fire season. International support that we sent to Australia. So an early fire season for us, and then folks turning around, coming back in March to what was yet again a very active fire season. And as many of you know, I take a bit of pride in the Australia support. That was an agreement I helped craft in 2008, 2009 that has led us to being able to share our resources portal to portal, either them visiting us or us going over there. Military support as well. And obviously the biggest challenge that we had last year, in addition to the fires, was dealing with COVID, and we're still dealing with COVID, and I'll talk a little bit about that. This is a slide OWF put together for a Wildland Fire Leadership Council meeting we had in April. Excuse me. Pretty self-explanatory. What worked in 2020 and lessons learned for 2021. Obviously, prioritizing health and safety has always been first and foremost. COVID definitely added another wrinkle to that. It did, however, allow for more virtual fire support functions. I know we had been doing that over the last few years with like WFDS as an example, running some of our projections remotely. Really highlighted our interagency cooperation, aircraft availability, and once again, community engagement via virtual public forums. I sat in a number of closeouts via Zoom in our Northwest Regional Fire as they closed out. Quickly taking a look at wildfire hazard potential. This map probably looks pretty darn close to same every year. We know where our continual hotspots are, and we continue to monitor those. But we've been in this pattern for quite a while. We know where we're starting in the Southwest, and as we move up into the Northwest, down to California, we got that pretty much nailed down, but we are increasing in intensity for sure. Quick outlook, views from April through July. Once again, not a big surprise. The biggest surprise, I think, was the Dakotas and Midwest region starting fire season early, much earlier than normal. So lastly, I want to leave you with some of our program priorities, things that I have set out that I feel are important for our staff. NIFC communications with regions and field. Many of you know I'm a former military man, and so chain of command is very important to me. And what we want to make sure we are doing is communicating with the regions for sure. And the way we do that, I now engage the regions and the regional director via requests. I sit on the weekly regional director conference call, and I highlight items that are working well, and I also comment on things that we need to tighten up. And an example I've been using quite a bit is high carryover amounts that we're seeing in our regions. So I bring that to the regional director's attention, and I think it's important for them to understand where our pinch points are and help articulate the benefit of having that form of communication. Another thing that I am firm on implementing is Fire Management Leadership Board. I have felt that the regions could have a stronger voice in NIFC BIA fire operations policy, as an example, And so would like to develop, we'll be looking at developing this board with a mix of our BIA NIFSI directors as well as regional FMOs as part of this. The decisions that we make together as a collective unit ultimately pay dividends to all of us as a collective unit, and I feel very firmly about that. Strategic planning. We're underway with an initiative in 2021 that mirrors much of the same effort that we had done in 2009 when we set out to develop the first workforce strategic plan. So we are taking a look at the 09 effort, helping populate the 2021, but the 2021's a much more robust effort. A lot of heavy lifting going on, but it will be, I firmly believe, a playbook for our future. We've been funded for Workforce Transformation Initiative. Not news to anyone listening to this presentation. It's going to be with us for a while. Congressional Research Service has been involved. OPM, OMB garnered a lot of attention and a lot of work is being done currently. It is going to be around for a while. And, you know, it's a good point, especially as we bolster up our tribal and BIA workforces for our future. I've already mentioned a lot of the current post-COVID world of wildland fire, especially how it affects us during suppression actions. We really did a great job last year. I know many of us were very concerned how it was going to play out. Pretty much went off without a hitch. We learned a lot last year during fire season that we are applying again this year. And really, I do believe it's going to change the face of wildland fire for our future. There's just going to be a number of things that we do learn post-pandemic that are good, they're beneficial, and we can learn and will learn from some of those. So anyway, that's my quick down and dirty. I guess now we'll take any questions via chat.
My name is Mark Jackson. I'm the Director of Fuels Management for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I want to thank the Intertribal Timber Council for the opportunity to present an update on the Fuels Management Program. Communities and ecosystems across Indian country face serious threats from fire, insects, disease, and climate change. An investment in fuels management can return 2 to 30 times the cost of suppression in the form of avoided costs. Of course, what the heck is an avoided cost? It's a loss not yet incurred, such as soil erosion, degraded water quality, and perhaps degraded timber value, to name a few. An example of an avoided cost was a report out of the Southwest region on the Doghead Fire, and just the impacts of the Doghead Fire were devastating in terms of property loss and damage to natural resource on private and national forest lands. Fortunately for the Isleta Pueblo, tribal land experienced only negligible effects. From a fire management investment perspective, if the total of all avoided costs, $2.9 million, were considered in relation to the present value of the fuel break construction cost, $129,000, the resulting benefit cost ratio is nearly 23 to 1. So that was a great investment in fuels management to prevent significant damage to trust lands. And so we would consider those costs, the potential $2.9 million of potential loss, that would be the cost that we avoided with the simple fuel break. Active management. We've heard that term now for the past couple of years. It came out of Secretary of Interior Zinke's term as right before he left. But where have we seen that before? And what we've seen is that active management is not new to Indian country. As a matter of fact, we in Indian country have been practicing active management for as long as we have been on these lands. IFMAT 1, the very first IFMAT in the 1990s, identified and recommended active management implementation. Active management empowers greater collaborative investment opportunities from joining fuels management with the management of tribal forest lands, woodlands, and rangelands. In the area of workforce development, BIA 90 IAM Chapter 4 states that funding is authorized for employee development and training and developing strategy and guidelines for recruiting, retaining, and training a fuels management workforce. The BIA and tribal fuels programs want to be the workplace of choice. We want to have people come to us, we want to recruit, and we clearly want to train and retain staff for and give them real opportunity of development and advancement within the organization of BIA and or the tribe and the development of natural resource managers. The workforce initiative or workforce transformation that was funded through the Office of Wildland Fire in this FY21 budget has really gained a very high level of interest, not only at the Office of Wildland Fire, but at OPM, and they are tracking our investment in our workforce very closely. The Workforce Initiative budget, new funding that came to the BIA in fuels was $3.87 million. Nationally, we invested $3.5 million into new and extending pay periods for tribal employees. We also invested another $387,000 into new positions and extended pay periods for BIA employees. In addition to the new dollars allocated for workforce initiative, BIA Fuels invested another $2.1 million in change in new employees and extending Bureau employees work base for a total of nearly $6 million of investments this year alone. Fuels highlights from last year. Fuels traded an historic high of over 364,000 acres, which was 180% over our historic average. That exceeded our planned target acres, and we exceeded that and got to 197% of what we had planned. We may ask, well, how were we able to do that? This was an opportunity that we took in BIA Fuels and Tribal Fuels of recognizing and utilizing active management strategies and concepts in developing what we've done in the past and actually recording that for the first time into the fuels record. So there could be thinning timber stands, that fuels participated in by piling and or burning those piles. We've never counted the thinning and generally not the piling in the past. Fuels treatments in the woodlands, the same way. Oftentimes, those aren't, if they're done by woodlands management, those aren't counted like fuels. So we've made a great effort to extend fuels funding over to other entities to be able to increase the amount of work that they can do and participate in the work that's being done and record that for the overall good of Indian country. Last year, Fuels conducted 159,000 plus acres of non-native and invasive species treatments. And the Reserve Treaty Rights Lands Program met 128 tribal and 40 collaborator priorities. Another highlight for fiscal year 20, strategically placed fuels treatments occurred at a 98% rate as recorded in the fuels treatment effectiveness monitoring data. Strategically placed fuels treatments help control and or manage fire at an occurrence rate of 98%. Both of those numbers are the highest of all federal agencies recorded in the FTE system, in the FTEM system between 2018 and 2020. And that's an extremely important item for us not to overlook. That means that the tribal and BIA fuels treatments are strategically placed and they're being hit by a lot of fires, and they're keeping the fires from getting large and or burning at a very high severity rate. Fuels treatments don't reduce the number of fires we have, they reduce the severity of the fires, and potentially through what we're seeing with FTEM, they're reducing the size of the fires by giving suppression resources an opportunity to catch them at a smaller size. And then I urge you to take a look at the Reserve Treaty Rights Lands program that's going to be presented later on in the week.
Hello, this is Sam Scranton, Deputy Director of the Fuels Management Program for the BIA. I'm also the National Wildfire Prevention Program Manager. Today I'm going to provide you with an update to the Wildfire Prevention Program. The Wildfire Prevention Program has several guidance documents that I want to just make mention of. The 90 IM Chapter 5 Wildfire Prevention Indian Affairs Manual was revised and released in May of 2020. In that document contains our responsibilities, standards, requirements, and procedures for the prevention program. If you'd like a copy of that, you can get it at www.bia.gov/policy-forms/manual. Another document that I want to bring mention to is our Indian Affairs Wildfire Prevention Handbook. It was revised and released in 2021, and that contains our program requirements. And you can find it at www.bia.gov/policy-forms/handbooks. I'd also like to make mention of our policy memorandums. In January of 2021, we issued a new memorandum regarding the new wildfire prevention planning and reporting requirements. In that, we mentioned specifically the Wildfire Prevention Spatial Assessment and Planning Strategies, or WIPSAP software application. Transition of all of our programs into this application is required by January 1 of 2022. In this software, we're also able to complete our accomplishment reporting requirements. We've conducted new user training. 5 trainings to date have been offered virtually. 31 BIA and 21 tribal members have completed the training to date. in the Wildfire Prevention Spatial Assessment Planning Strategy software application. To get to that, you must have an EGP account to access it. To get to that, you go to egp.nwcg.gov and request your account. Once you have that, you can go to that URL /whipsaps/login and get to that software application. It's housed on that EGP platform. If you need further assistance, just contact your regional WUI prevention specialist. I'd also just like to make mention that the 21 budget has been released and should be out there at the regions and available for all of the OSG tribes. If you have any further questions on any of this, just give me a call or contact me at my email address or phone number shown.
Good afternoon. My name is Josh Simmons. I'm the Operations Director for the Bureau of Indian Affairs Branch of Wildland Fire Management, located here at the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise, Idaho. Today, I'll be providing you with a Fire Operations Program update to include an Interagency Fire Coordination update from the NMAC perspective. Starting off with the operations priorities for 2021 for the BIA, we have a heavy emphasis in fire management planning and trying to make those improvements. Currently, the BIA fire preparedness programs have been operated based on the fire management program analysis, as you know, as FMPA for over 16 years with little to no updates. This planning model was utilized to make predetermined resource amounts to establish maximum effective levels, ultimately for funding allocation for each unit across the country to ensure we had response to fire needs and risk. As of today, the only two functions that are actually utilizing FMPA outputs for management are financial and equipment. Currently, that would be our fire preparedness funding allocations by regional percentage, which was a roll-up of unit level percentages up to regional percentages, and that's how funding is allocated to meet preparedness needs. Secondly, the Model 52 fire engine program fleet numbers and locations have been determined by FMPA as well, and those two functions are still result of FMPA. Given that FMPA is over 16 years old, we've seen a need to adjust and improve our planning efforts and look at new planning perspectives and ways to look at things to improve our fire management programs across the country. Fire management planning section is operated under fire operations here at NIFC, and they have been proposing a new wildland fire management strategic plan. Through this plan, the intent is to provide true cohesive approach to wildland fire management, establish common vision, goals, objectives, organizational structure, and true successional planning, and to improve our workforce development processes. Through this process, we want to re-evaluate our current organizational structure, ensure all jurisdictions under BIA are covered under true successful target organizations that provide sound leadership and staffing levels to meet determine success levels and provide workforce successional planning. Through this process, the emphasis will ensure that we have adequate leadership levels established for all units, including fire management officers, fire operations specialists, field specialists, prevention specialists, and then adequate staffing levels for engines, crews, and other resource needs to help us make risk-based fire management evaluations and response to fire management. Our hopes is to be collective with fields management, aviation, and base preparedness as well, and also establish as it coincides with other programs under the Bureau of Indian Affairs and meet Intertribal priorities. Through this process, we also want to provide better support and consideration for wildland fire facilities, fire equipment, and maximize and improve use of fire funding to meet our overall fire management objectives. At this time, we have difficulties with understanding and improving our wildland fire management facilities and its inventory and all kinds of fire equipment. So through this process, we hope to have a collective and cohesive approach to further determining our needs and how to define unmet needs for fire management facilities and our fire equipment, but overall look for cost-effective measures to improve our use of fire management funding. Moving on to additional priority focus for 2021, we are also looking at our wildland fire management fleet overall across the country. As you may know, the Model 52 fire engines have been distributed to the field. Our acquisition process and their replacement process have been based off the old FMPA outputs. This may not at this time meet current organizational needs, and therefore our organization is looking to reevaluate our current fleet numbers, the locations of that fleet, and revise to ensure that we right size and match fleet numbers with staffing levels, and also overall ensure that it meets the structure needed to respond to wildland fire situations and needs at local units. Right now, true overall management and replacement cycles of wildland fire fleet only occur on Model 52 wildland fire engines, which are only Type 6 and Type 4s at this time, interagency hot track crews, and helitack modules. Through our process and operations, we're looking to consider overall national wildland fire fleet needs and processes in determining how we can actually get a better handle on all wildland fire fleet needs, everything from engines, crew carriers, various utility type vehicles, command vehicles for overhead, and other needs to make sure that we have consistent and safe equipment. We'll be reevaluating and establishing standards for all wildland fire fleet to ensure they meet NFPA standards. NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association, who sets safety standards and operational standards for equipment and apparatus for all hazard and wildland fire. We want to make sure that our equipment overall meet current technology standards and ensure they provide a professional fire organization appearance, so that we coincide with all of our interagency partners to have a professional fire organization. We also are proposing to establish procedures to provide national overall management of all wildland fire fleet, so that way we can ensure a cost-effective and adequate fleet support process and system to meet the needs of regional and unit level organizations, so we have a continued cost-effective way to acquire and replace this equipment throughout the years. Our big focus right now is to make sure that our equipment utilized in the field meets safety standards and continue to get replaced as on cycles that are necessary to make sure our personnel are safe when they're out in response or just supporting fire operations functions. To help us meet the needs of this program, we have detailed Ross Wise from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service into our National Fleet Manager position here at the Branch of Wildland Fire Management. Ross is a Zone Fire Management Officer for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Las Vegas, Nevada, and he will be working with us for 120 days to help develop plans and protocols and procedures to help us adjust and improve our national wildland fire fleet. Ross will begin working with our Model 52 center managers, our leadership here at NIFC, but also the regional and unit level and tribal level fire management experts and staff to help us evaluate our current positions with fleet current needs, and also develop these new standards and processes for us to improve our fleet management process as we move forward through the next few years. Moving on to discussions on an interagency fire community coordination effort, I'm coming at this as the chair of the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group on a national level. So interagency fire community coordination is a coordinated response from the federal, state, county, tribal, and local government entities to provide national and international assistance to wildland fire in all risk situations. All risk situations are things from hurricane response, tornado response, all natural disasters, to include the current COVID vaccination effort we've been supporting through the Emergency Support Function 4 to help get a handle on and reduce the risks of COVID-19 mitigation. Through this effort, the coordination effort, as you know, is a tiered process from local, zone, geographic, and national levels, with associated coordination, dispatch centers, and coordinating groups that provide oversight to help determine priorities and ensure fair and effective response and support to incidents that occur on all jurisdictions. This coordination effort is crucial for all of us to meet our needs and our demands, from initial attack to large fire and other natural disasters, to make sure we're getting and receiving the resources necessary to do our jobs, to protect our communities, and to provide opportunities to reduce risk and threat to cultural, natural resources, and the rest of the public. Through this process at a national level, the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group, known as the NMAC, works to provide a national level coordinated effort for the country on national and international assistance. The members of the NMAC consist of the National Association of State Foresters, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Land Management, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the United States Forest Service, the National Park Service, and the FEMA U.S. Fire Administration. All these members work together to provide a mission of national wildland fire operations management, priority setting, and resource allocation through multi-agency coordination. We as a group collectively work to determine national preparedness levels for sound situational awareness. We established national priorities among geographic areas based on threats and risk to the public, to property, to infrastructure, cultural natural resources, and any other values at risk that are determined. We also determined resource allocation among geographic areas as resource shortages come short when we're in high demand times during preparedness levels 4 and 5, but we also work through preparedness level at all preparedness levels to meet these needs. We also evaluate resource needs and requirements and make determinations on when it's appropriate to mobilize and coordinate with our military and international partners. Currently, we work with Mexico, Canada, and Australia for international assistance to receive assistance and provide assistance to help them meet their needs as well. We also provide national oversight and direction related to interagency coordination and mobilization to ensure that the national, geographic, local unit, zone, and each agency are operating on the same standards and that we have consistent equal standards for how we mobilize resources to meet all of our needs and demands as much as possible. For 2021, the NMAC has set some priorities to work on for improvements as they were a result of our NMAC after action review for 2020. As you know, 2020 was a year of setting records with a global pandemic, setting records for bringing in, activating military, bringing in international partners, but also providing response and assistance to Australia in a high demand time for them as well. Through this process, we've determined some needs to work on and working through 2021 to establish a development of a national military mobilization guide, which will help us on making standard decisions on when to activate the military and also qualification standards of our personnel that are working directly with the military. We are developing an international mobilization guide to help our responders when they assist our international partners, sending assistance to them, but also developing crosswalks for us to work on understanding qualification requirements between all countries, whereas our standards don't always align. We're also working on considerations and evaluations of the complex incident management team concept as it was recommended by the Incident Workforce Development Group. This is a process in which we're trying to improve the successional planning, but also how to advance our incident management teams to be able to deal with even more complex incidents every single year, whereas we're no longer in fire seasons, we're in fire years. We're also evaluating considerations with how to implement recommendations of incident management and remote response, or as we know as IMRR. This is a process that was tasked to the Incident Commander Advisory Council, ICAC, to provide recommendations to us on how to operate in a remote virtual environment. Last year with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of virtual assignments be successful, but how do we improve that operation going forward and making it standard to help to make sure that our personnel are working safe as they continue to support large fires and protecting our communities. Lastly, the NMAC is working on and evaluating employment requirements for Type 1 and Type 2 incident commanders. Currently, we've had some issues with understanding employment requirements such as administratively determined, retirees, other types of employment for Type 1, Type 2 incident commanders. Our focus is to make sure that our leadership for these incident management teams, which are crucial for our success, have employment requirements and standards that allow them to fully lead a team, an incident management team at all levels and operate in complex environments to meet our demands and needs for wildland fire and all hazards.
Hi, my name is Darryl Martinez. I'm the program coordinator for the burned area rehabilitation or the post-wildfire recovery program. Today we're going to talk about the program itself, certain components, what is BAER, what is ES, and what is BAER underneath the post-wildfire recovery program. We'll talk a bit about the process itself, the BAER process. Then we'll get into a little of the operational summary and end with some of our program activities and priorities. So many of you have seen this slide before. There are 4 components really within the post-wildfire recovery world. There's suppression rehabilitation, emergency stabilization, BAER, and finally restoration. We're going to talk primarily about emergency stabilization and burned area rehab. The ES side is the emergency component of BAER. the post-wildfire recovery program. There's an urgency to get that done within the first year because of the emergency situation. We're primarily looking at threats to life and property. We're trying to minimize those threats to life and property, but we're also trying to stabilize and prevent degradation to critical natural and cultural resources. The funding for ES is out of the suppression account, so we use wildfire account money. The burned area rehabilitation program is a non-emergency program that addresses longer term issues, that aren't going to come back on their own. So we're looking at reforestation and other issues like that. And that's a longer term, 3 to 5 years typically. That funding allocation comes down from Department of Interior, and we have a finite amount of money each year that we are allowed to allocate toward that. So some of the treatments we've done under ES, as I said, ES is more the emergency side of the post-wildfire recovery process, and we're looking at structure protection and a number of other emergency issues, as you can see here. Under the burned area rehabilitation side, we're looking at the longer term recovery process that includes reforestation, minor facilities, and so on. BAER has its limitations. We're a bit of a band-aid. We're not there to fix historic problems just because fire comes through. So if there's pre-existing conditions, BAER's not there to fix those issues, nor is it meant to expand or hold up, support programs for long-term. We don't get into research or long-term fire effects monitoring. And we're primarily interested in those trust resources, so the federal trust lands and not necessarily privately owned areas. Talking a little bit about the process itself, it's a rapid assessment process. We're often in and out within, 10 days to 14 days, and it's meant to be very responsive and reactive. We start with a initial kind of a pre-assessment to determine what the extent of the fire is and what the complexity is, and really try and get a grasp of what those values are on the ground that may be affected by the fire. And based off of that, we're going to start determining what our resources, what our team needs are. We often will order a burned area reflectance classification map and then start with an in-briefing at the local level. So the in-briefing is extremely important to determine what those values at risk are, to work locally with the tribe or the agency and gather the appropriate documentation, and then we'll move into the field evaluation, finalize that bark image to develop a burn severity map, and that helps us to determine what the exact threats are, to determine if those values are truly at risk, and mitigating and identify treatments to mitigate. We'll work into designing those treatments so they best fit the situation, making sure they're cost feasible and they're specific to that particular area. And then finally, this is all wrapped up in a BAER plan that supports what the selection of those critical values are and justifies the treatment design. So what exactly does this team do? So we've got a team of different ologists. So we're looking at, depending on what the values at risk are, we'll build a team based on that, whether there's cultural resources affected, there's hydrologic issues, we have fish and wildlife, T&E species. Depending on what those affected resources are, we'll build a team off of that. And that team will probably consist of some national resources and then a large component of the local unit. And we will be working for the agency administrator, the superintendent. We're going to do, like I said earlier, we're going to assess that severity, get out in the field and do a risk assessment and a risk evaluation, and design our treatments. So the roles and responsibilities start from the ground up. The agency and tribe need to identify what their resources are. You know, who their local natural resource folks are that might be interested or pulled into the BAER efforts once a wildfire occurs, so we can identify what those true values are on the ground. They're also going to be determining, you know, what the team looks like and if they even need a team. Once a plan is put in place, there's going to be some local project management that needs to occur, and of course the accomplishment data has to come from the ground up. So those are some of the roles and responsibilities that the local agency and tribe are going to be, responsible for. The regional BAER coordinator is going to be the conduit between, the ground level and all the way up to the national level, and making sure that process is flowing continually. They're going to be reviewing plans and making sure we're in compliance with BAER policy and authority. They're also going to make sure that those plans are entered into NIFPORs, the monies is flowing all the way down to the ground, and so on. The national coordinators are going to be working on making sure that money is available, freeing that money at the highest level and making it available to the region and further down, all the way down to the tribe. We'll also be assisting with getting national resources, BAER team members available and mobilized down to the incident. We will also provide technical assistance and program policy guidance for tribes and agencies. And finally, we'll be reviewing the final product and processing any requests for funding. For 2021, we've allocated approximately $4.5 million to 14 projects at 11 different tribes. We had more need than money, so we had to prioritize, and some of the priorities included cultural planting, reforestation, and invasive species. On the emergency stabilization side, to date, we've made $1.5 million available over 21 projects to 18 different tribes. So some of our activities and priorities for the year, we're really looking at, or not the year, but going forward, we're really looking at improving our communication and information sharing, both up and down the BAER side, to get some of that information down to the field level and find out what's happening on the ground moving forward. With that, we've built a SharePoint site within BIA that we're making available to folks that are interested. We also held a BAER training back in February that gave us 3 days worth of tools to work with on what is BAER about, who are some of our cooperators, the whole process. So it was a pretty informative site, and we've got recordings of that training on our SharePoint site. We're also looking to improve our whole NIFPORS project reporting process, everything from accomplishments to the funding and everything. So we're working hard on that NIFPORS, making it hopefully making it a little more user friendly, and further being able to report that information up to OWF so we can get appropriate projects funded. We're also working at trying to build our expertise at the national level and get the appropriate folks in there so we can reach down to the ground level and assist Indian country with post-wildfire recovery. Finally, we're looking at improving our implementation support. You know, once that plan is written, how do we give the tribes and the agencies the tools and the support they need to get that plan implemented on the ground? And we also want, with that, we want to make sure we're visiting places and doing proper reviews, not in a punitive way, but to learn from each other on what's working, what isn't, and with that, doing AARs to determine, you know, what's working and what isn't. So I want to, at this point, we'll take some questions, but I want to thank Juliet for putting this PowerPoint together and overall just being a great support and advocate for burned area emergency response and post-wildfire recovery.
My name is Garth Fisher. I am the Branch of Wildland Fire Training Program Manager. I am here today to discuss some of the training goals and objectives and strategies we employ here at the Branch of Wildland Fire Management. There will be a little bit of room at the end to have some questions and some discussions. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for allowing me to present today. So as you can see here, fire training is broken up into two program areas currently: fire training and training development. Fire training is what I would consider to be required coursework, mandatory coursework. Things like NWCGS courses or UTV and ATV training or aviation refreshers, things that firefighters and aviation personnel have to go out into the field and mobilize each year on fire assignments for the BIA and the tribes. Training development are programs that I would consider to fall under recruitment, retention, or extraneous programs such as 401 training so people can advance in their careers, or the prescribed fire training center program, possibly the BIA fire mentoring program. Things that allow somebody to be a little bit more empowered, become part of the decision-making process, and move forward with their career. So currently the National Office Training Program encompasses 3 employees: myself, the Training Program Manager, an NWCG training specialist who helps to build and develop NWCG training courses, and an audio-visual training production specialist. Right now we are representatives on 14 interagency committees and subcommittees. This representation ensures that when there are discussions about changes to standards or policies, that the BIA and the tribes have a voice at the table, which seeks to ensure that when these changes are brought up and when the decisions are made, that they do not impact our agency negatively. We do our best to vet any of these type of changes with as many people as we can. There's usually a slight period of time to go ahead and vet the ideas before they're put into action. And that is our job as representatives on these committees, is to make sure that as many people as we can know about changes that could be coming and have a chance to voice their opinion before there is a change in policy. Right now, the Branch of Wildland Fire Management employees have mobilized 65 plus days in the last 2 years, primarily to support fires on trust lands. Currently, the BIA Fire Training Program develops policy and builds course training for over 5,400 BIA and tribal firefighters. This number includes around 3,400 GS personnel and around 2,000 tribal and AD personnel. These numbers have fluctuated greatly over the years. Those can be attributed to many things: budget fluctuations, medical standards program testing, various recruitment and retention programs. So right now, currently, in 2021, we have 5,400 firefighters who are able to respond on BIA trust lands. So as a good friend once told me, training is where people are taught what right looks like. Training takes a lot of interagency collaboration. Our goal is to make sure that we are standardized with everybody else and that we are on common ground, and that when our employees or other employees from DOI or the Forest Service show up on our fires, or we show up on their fires, that our training is commensurate, that our firefighters have the same training and opportunities for training that other DOI and USF firefighters have, which means that when these guys hit the ground running and they are putting out fire, they're suppressing fire, that we're all working off the same page, that we've had the same training, we've had the same field training, and that our firefighters are on the same level and their firefighters are on the same level as the BIA and tribal firefighters are. So the Branch of Wildland Fire Management Training and Development Plan is an overview document, is a strategic guiding document built for the next 5 years, which houses our training objectives, goals, and strategies. So our strategic guiding document that I just showed you on the previous slide is tiered into goals, objectives, and strategies. I'm going to give you a few examples of how this looks by talking a little bit about the first goals, objectives, and strategies. So as you can see here, goal number 1 is to align fire training with resource and staffing needs in support of the Branch of Wildland Fire Management mission. This also brings in the mission of the BIA, the DOI, and the Federal Cohesive Fire Strategy. So you can see here that it says ensure newly developed trainings are being implemented based on filling an identified skills gap, that they are measurable and effective. Ensure training is targeted to the correct audience, so money, time, and resources spent in training are sufficient and justifiable. Ensure training is developed, recommended, or required based upon sound analysis, input from the regional and field personnel, and with thoughtful, specific, and strategic reasoning. And also to ensure training is adaptable, pertinent, pointed, and that the reasoning behind it is understood. Nobody likes training just for training needs. There has to be justification for it, there has to be money for it, and it has to be sustainable if it's going to be effective. Under that same goal is objective number 1. The training must ensure BIA and tribal fire personnel are afforded opportunities for quality, pointed, strategic, and effective training. The Branch of Wildland Fire Management Training Strategy follows 4 basic tenets. That is for us to develop and adhere to a comprehensive fire training model, which includes analysis, field input, funding, implementation, and timelines. We utilize a consistent and widespread communications plan. We also develop and implement programs that address priority areas. We are creating a system of opportunity and accountability. Our goal always is to accelerate employee empowerment and leadership potential. So how does the training cycle work for the BIA? Number 1, a skills gap is identified and data analysis begins at the branch level. These are the questions I ask when somebody poses either a new training or a change to training, remembering that any training requires budgeting and logistics. Sometimes that is not always easy for some of our smaller units or some of our smaller tribes. So we try to consider these questions whenever anybody brings up any type of policy change that may require a training change, more equipment, more personnel to go ahead and put that training on at the local unit. So those questions are, is it necessary? Is it a safety concern, which drives a lot of our training? Is it viable funding-wise and implementation-wise? Can we consistently fund this over the amount of years that it needs to be funded to make sure that all of our personnel have the opportunity to take this training? Is it consistent with our partner agencies? So if one of our partner agencies, such as the BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service, etc., are utilizing a training that we see we probably need to go ahead and step up to, then we will probably consider that. We will seek out some funding and we will start to coordinate the implementation. Phase 2 of that process is developing a communication plan. Who is going to be affected? What regions are going to be affected? What personnel are going to be affected? Where and why? All of the W's. This question is sent to the regional FMOs and all of the regional training staff for feedback. We go ahead and gather the feedback. If it's positive and we decide that we do need a policy change or a training change, then we develop a transition plan. That sets a timeline and an implementation timeline for when that training is going to begin and who that training is going to affect. Branch level funding is secured at that time, and if feasible, is allocated to each region. So a good example of recent fire training developments where we identified a skills gap were our driving requirements. We realized that we have a lot of personnel who operate engines, who maintain engines. There was some data that was being backed up by NTSB that involved some driving accidents that we realized maybe some of our drivers and their level of driving skill was not commensurate with the other DOI and Forest Service agencies. And we decided that we were going to go ahead and fix this by adopting a new course requirement and position requirement, which would ensure that our drivers had as much training as the other DOI agencies and Forest Service personnel, that knew how to maintain their equipment properly, and that were given the skills to go out and operate that equipment effectively without as many injuries. So we adopted the engine operator course 2 years ago. This is a required course. It's a 40-hour course. There are field training components. There are in-class training components. And this now sits in between Firefighter Type 2 and Engine Boss, where there did not used to be a driving course. In fact, the only driving course was the 4-hour defensive driving course that was required, which is online. But no field component course was ever required for BIA personnel that actually had this much of a classroom and field portion dedicated to it until we readopted this engine operator course just 2 years ago. The basic driver course is developed for any fire personnel who are operating equipment. That includes rental equipment. That includes office personnel who are leaving the office maybe to go out and work in ICP, but they are utilizing possibly a 4x4 and they are driving off-road. And so this is something that we can ensure that our ADs who maybe are getting thrown the keys to go move a vehicle on a fire assignment, they may not be the primary driver, but they still may be called upon to move a piece of equipment. Again, have at least the bare minimum of some adequate driving skills in the field, utilizing the equipment that they'll actually drive, and to make sure that they are safe while they're doing it, safe to the other people around them and safe to themselves. So the fire training implementation plan addresses some of the fire training development portion that we do here at the branch. This is a document that uses goals and objectives from the training development plan and quantifies them into action items. This includes training, recruitment, and retention programs and other proposals. Some of the examples of these proposals are to communicate our recruitment efforts more effectively to a wider demographic. This includes creating and updating existing fire recruiting videos, continually saturating available candidates with hiring information, drastically increasing our social media presence. Also, another plan is to create more visual aids, posters, flyers, etc., which can be hung in schools, post offices, grocery stores, any high traffic locations to encourage interest in pursuing BAA Fire as the employer of choice. Here at the branch level, we are trying to make sure that we retain the employees we have. We are trying to encourage our employees to enroll and take advantage of all leadership and training opportunities. We're looking to create and support a robust detailer program so we can move some of our employees around the nation, exposing them to other ways to suppress and manage fire and lands. We are encouraging interest in and securing funding for 401 professional leadership training. We are also using IDPs and EPAPs to thoughtfully steer our workforce towards agency goals, and also while encouraging and supporting their personal ambitions. So another factor in the retention of BI employees that plays into training is IFPM. Interagency Fire Program Management was implemented in 2004 and was a strategy developed for 13 key fire leadership positions, built with the intent of ensuring our personnel who are in supervisory positions are adequately qualified. IFPM policy must be considered with every step of an employee's development due to the fact that it is important for career advancement, is required for career advancement, and is important for agencies that are following a structured succession planning model. So the basic tenet is a well-qualified and trained employee is more likely to be retained by an agency if they realize that their goals and development have been considered at every juncture of their career. This increases their empowerment, their decision-making, and very importantly for most of us, is increases their earning potential. This sets them up for future management and leadership within the BIA. So you may ask yourself, what is the branch of Wildland Fire Management doing right now to support some of this training development? Well, currently, we are involved with the National Interagency Joint Apprenticeship Program. That is the Wildland Fire Apprentice Program. We are involved with the 401 Series Professional Series Certificate Program. We are involved with the Pathways Fire Student Program and College to Career Program run at Salish Kootenai College. We just got involved with the U.S. Forest Service Leadership Roundtable, which targets our GS 5 through 9 future leaders by involving them in staff rides and letting them participate in some dialogue with upper level bureau and tribal leadership. We have been involved with the Prescribed Fire Training Center, PFTC, and we are involved in Women in Fire initiatives and programming. These are the three major tenets of BIA training: strive for excellence, create and take advantage of developmental opportunities, maintain flexibility, and move forward strategically.
thank you, Stephanie. And Stephanie and I had a chat that we were chatting back and forth. I had a couple questions that I didn't see until she showed them to me. So thank you for that. And I think it was Ron Jim, and then Ron responded on the administrative support functions and then facilities. I just wanted to briefly talk about facilities. I know Josh had mentioned Russ Wise coming in as a detailer. And the specific reason we wanted Russ to come in was to really take a look at our fleet, what we're doing nationally, as well as our facilities. And I think we all, especially me coming from the region, have had some concerns at how we look at our facilities program, how it's funded, really strengthening the Division of Facilities Management Services out of Albuquerque is needed. So anyway, Russ has hit the ground running. He's been doing some great work. He's only been here, what, Josh, week and a half or so, and he's really taken this on, which is what we hoped for. So I think the benefit we'll see in Indian country is a little bit better handle on our fleet. And that's not just the Model 52, but fuels, aviation as an example. But probably more importantly is our facilities program. I think we all have some pained stories from our regions, which didn't work for us. We have had success stories, but it has been a little slow and a long time coming. So I briefly just wanted to mention that, Stephanie. I'm glad to have Russ. Russ comes from outside the BIA, Fish and Wildlife Service, a different perspective on these challenging problems. So just wanted to share that real quick.
Thanks, Bodie. And it looks like we have another question. I'm just gonna put it as a live answer. What are you doing to make IC5 training available to more personnel? And I think that's to anyone who can answer on the panel. Garth, it looks like you're typing it in. Did you want to just share over the mic?
Yeah, I was trying to, pardon me, I was trying to unmute there. It's in a different spot than it is on Teams, so it was taking me a second to find it up in the corner there. So, you know, our ICS training is actually controlled by FEMA. And right now, most of our firefighter type 1 coursework, which also encompasses IC type 5, is fairly standard. That's actually taught at the unit level, not taught at the national level. It's taught down at the unit levels. And that course can be put on pretty much by any unit that has qualified personnel. So really, there aren't many restrictions on it as long as you're following the field manager's course guide and you actually have adequate training people teaching the course. It's fairly standard, and as I remember when I took it, honestly, I think there were 5 of us in the engine bay who just sat on a couch and took it for 3 days. So it's readily available. You can order it through the cash system. It's very easy to put on with a qualified instructor, and you don't need to have a qualification to do it. And then it's just the position task book after that, and it's all OJT. So feel free to get back to me on that if you need more on it. But right now, a fairly simple course to put on and easily accessible.
Thanks. And it looks, we've got a lot of great conversations happening in the chat. So I do encourage folks to take a look at that. One that folks might not have seen was the GIS story map for the Garden Creek Fire and Fuel Treatment. And then also, if anyone was interested, and I hope I don't mispronounce this, with the Jocko Prairie with Camas project, there's a PowerPoint presentation available in the 2019 ITC Symposium CD. So those are some other resources that we've had shared over the line. And Ron just shared the TFM model for workforce development. And we're getting a couple questions. Go ahead.
I want to thank Ron for bringing that up. I think that's a very key component as we look forward to workforce transformation. I think we had a lot of success with TFM. So I wanted to thank Ron for bringing that up, and good seeing you again, Ron.
Yeah, good to see you, Bodie. Good to see you. Looking good, man.
And we got some more questions. One from Don regarding outreach partnerships that will be included besides ITC and other federal agencies in the workforce strategy. Anyone want to take that?
This is Josh Simmons. I guess I'll take a stab at it real quick. So, you know, one of the things about Wildland Fire that I think is fairly unique for, you know, well, for the federal government, but also the tribes here and that we, you know, how we work is a lot of the business we do is interagency in general. Anyways, we work with a lot of our partners at many levels. We're probably one of the more unique programs in which we work in, you know, organized coordinating groups, committees, and different stuff to help kind of work standardize how we do training, development, standards, and various practices to meet our needs in fire management. We do a lot of work with our interagency partners to try to help. We're all on the same page of trying to figure out what we need to do for workforce development, successional planning, you know, developing leaders. It's a big thing. It's probably one of the bigger things, Bodie, correct me if I'm wrong, that our leadership at the secretary level and all kinds of levels are actually taking to look at this and how do we improve it. At least within the interior, you know, specific to BIA, there's been a heavy emphasis in promoting successional planning, workforce development, building leaders in BIA and with our tribal governments to help us to improve our organizations and also develop people to replace the rest of us that are still here. So I do believe there's a lot of work going on there. One of the things that we've been working on and we've identified at least with some of the planners we have, so we have a couple planners that are a little bit new in our organization, and that's a good thing because they're helping us to see things we may not have seen in the past. A lot of the workforce planning that we need to do kind of starts with internally taking a self-assessment of our own organization, figuring out where we are, what our needs are. You know, as I alluded to in the presentation I provided, it's been 16 years since we've had an updated planning model to help us determine an organization, and that's one of the critical things. And Bodie hit on this in his presentation too about strategic planning. Without it, we've really fallen behind. So with Bodie's leadership, we've been pushing forward, trying to be strategic in process, trying to really figure out and determine what is an effective organization, what's an effective target organization, ultimately developing that successional planning model from a entry-level firefighter up to a leadership position without having to leave the unit. And that's one thing we miss today in a lot of our organizations. FIMPA was our old model, not that it was bad. It's just we've outgrown it. It's like anything in time. It's like a carbureted vehicle. I mean, some of us are still driving them, but they're not the most efficient or best running vehicle in the world. So making those improvements and those adjustments will really help us to move forward into the future. And a lot of that is education. And that's where Garth has been big, is talking about education, training, developing our people, also bringing on mentors. So those of us that are in positions now, being good key mentors to our personnel that we're trying to lead up is going to be critical in our process. So I think there's a lot going on. The planning model, we're really looking at in the strategic process. We're trying to develop or propose organizations that will actually truly support successional planning. It's just those assessments we need to do at every level, from central office, regional office, unit agency, tribal, working collaboratively to define those organizations and how we'll collectively work together to achieve that. It's going to be pretty much the key thing, I think.
Thank you, Josh. And we are at time, but we're getting a couple more questions, so folks are okay to stay on a little bit. We had one question from Jim about elaborating on measures being taken to reduce the carryover issue in fuels.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So I guess I'm elected to answer that question. So there are a number of items that have plagued us over time with fuels carryover. And one of those is hiring and or the lack of it through the Bureau of Indian Affairs HR process. It's a bit convoluted, and I know the Bureau is looking at advances and solutions in the future that may provide us one point of contact for nationally to be able to hire staff. As an example, I believe it was last year, we had one region that had 58% of our entire national carryover. Well, in addition to having greater than $3 million of carryover, that particular region had a number of unfilled positions. And so those tend to facilitate each other's getting worse and worse. If you can't fill positions, it's more difficult to put projects on the ground and effectively utilize funds. So in my opinion, those go hand in hand, and the Bureau's trying to address that. Other items that we're trying to do to address carryover in fuels is we're looking at more administrative staff at the regional level to provide the administrators the opportunity to more closely track their budgets. And it's a difficult task at the regional level when some of the managers have a difficult time understanding and allocating resources as they come out and tracking them over time, especially through a fire season. And then contracting is a third spoke that's very difficult to overcome for us in fuels. We have some regions that do a great job in contracting. We have other regions that have not taken the mantle of contracting and made it a very smooth operating procedure. And those are items that are outside of the control of not only the fuel specialists at the regions, but the fire managers and the fuels managers, and often in the instance of HR outside the purview of the regional director. So further explanation, Jim? All right, hearing none, thank you.
I'm just going to highlight a piece of this because it is so critically important when we look at additional funding opportunities. If we can't spend what we currently have, it's intuitive that we're not going to get more. So, and that's why in my presentation I mentioned the regional directors who have executive oversight of our regions need to be in the know. If we can't spend our funding, our money that's allocated to us through appropriations, then we need to change the way we take a look at how we do business. We have an opportunity in the upcoming out-year budgets to gain more fuels funding, BAER funding, but if we can't spend what we currently have, it doesn't bode well for us. So that's what I want to relay to the regional directors, is that if we have problems, I want them to be aware of it, but I also let them know if things are working well, and we give those attaboys, because we do have some great work being done out at our regions and our tribes that we now have the visibility to raise, and happy to do it. And I think that's critical for the success of our programs to raise the visibility of our fire programs to that level. So just wanted to add on what Mark was saying.
Thank you, Bodie. And it looks like Garth was able to answer one of the last questions. So the last question we have unanswered is between, I believe this is from Vernon. I believe I've seen wildfire hazard potential map displayed at least in 3 different presentations during this year's virtual symposium. Could someone elaborate on the value of that product and how it's being utilized?
Well, maybe I'll defer first to our NMAC rep, and then I'll give my 2 cents worth on that. Good question.
Yeah, can you restate that question again so I clearly understand it?
Yeah, it's also, if you open up the Q&A, I'll just read out what Vernon typed in. I believe I've seen the wildfire hazard potential map displayed at least in 3 different presentations during this year's virtual symposium. Could someone elaborate on the value of that product and how it is being utilized?
I guess I'll start just kind of from an NMAC perspective. You know, we look at a national level, hazard potential is how we define our business and how we're going to respond to fire risk. So, you know, the hazard potential defines the areas that are critical for fire potential, for large fire, initial attack, or other activities that may impact the natural resources, lives, property, stuff like that. So, you know, it's important to understand those and help us define where we invest efforts, funding, and other things. You know, on an interagency response process through like the NMAC process, you know, the hazard outlook things, they change kind of almost monthly, weekly. But it's critical because that's how we make decisions on moving resources and assets, when to activate, when to do things. So it's one of those critical tools that we analyze, you know, looking at all kinds of different aspects that affect wildland fire. So everything that we look at is, you know, fuels related, values at risk related is huge. It's one of the probably the biggest priority things that we look at as an opportunity to evaluate is priorities at risk. And then also looking at our weather conditions and stuff that impact us on an annual basis. So probably not the best answer, but it is one of those that we utilize. I mean, hazard potential is one that changes quite frequently. Is hard to maintain because it changes so often, and I guess in certain perspectives. Yeah.
No, thanks for that, Josh, because I like how Josh brings in that national MAC perspective. So as an example, tomorrow, Pacific Northwest Coordinating Group will have the exec meetings to talk about 2020 fire season in Oregon, Washington, but we'll also project for the 2021. And that hazard map is going to be a great point of discussion. As Josh mentioned, the mobilization of resources, where we'll talk about snowpack. And that map does reflect the lack of snowpack in much of the Northwest as an example. And so for execs tomorrow, that will be kind of the first shot over the bow is we've been in this place before. We need to prepare. So what do we have to prepare for? So tomorrow, the State Forester of Oregon, or the acting, the other is resigning, or the previous, Washington, DNR, and it's really an open discussion on preparing for what is more than likely going to happen with that hazard map, and how can we share our resources? What can we do to enhance our collaboration starting in June, July, and August for us? So just a more practical example of how we use those maps. More often than not, they hold true to form, but hey, we're happy when they don't in many cases. So anyway, just wanted to build off what Josh had mentioned.
It looks like I have Mark in the queue. Go ahead, Mark.
So I may have misunderstood the reference to the hazard map, but that map is intended to be used for a national or a large geographic area in over a long term to recognize risk, to be able to give national perspective to where we are in the number of acres. Now the map, and that's the map that we utilize in fuels. I believe the indices map that Bodie and Josh are referring to, those do change greater over time, but the actual wildland hazard potential map moves quite slowly. So in reference to that particular map, Vern, you wouldn't want to take that map and say, I'm going to plan a treatment in this area because on the map I see that it's high. That would be utilizing too gross of a scale, too broad of a scale of hazard prediction or hazard forecasting. You'd want to go down to a more local scale and identify the area in concern or the project area of concern, and then make some determinations locally as to how you would rate that particular risk rating. An example of some of the times that the hazard map does not do well, and that's in the Midwest, in BIA and Fish and Wildlife Service grasslands. Oftentimes, the satellites are recognizing those lands as non-vulnerable, and they're not represented well. So we have to take the context of what the WHP is actually